So I know Rebecca's going to start us off. Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody.
Yes, good afternoon. Shall we get started? Okay, well, thank you all for being here today for working group number 2. I did drop in the chat a link to a Google Doc with our agenda today. I'm going to not share the screen right away so we can all see each other on the screen. If you could please share your video so we can put faces to names, that would be wonderful. We had a slight change to our agenda based on the discussion that we had this morning as the main ARPA steering committee gets together on a week-over-week basis. And there were a few things that came up that we thought, Susan and I thought would be important to share with all of you to add some additional framework for our work going forward. And so there's 2 specific things that I want to go over. The first one is that there was a proposal template checklist that was created to help support each of the working groups working through the details of our ideas. And we hope by the time we end today's meeting that all of us will be assembled into a few different work groups to dive into the ideas that bubble to the surface. And the work that we do between now and working group number 3, we will use this template checklist to guide that work. The purpose of it is to help us really build out the areas that will give the commissioners enough information to be able to make good decisions about which recommendations to adopt and move forward with. So that's one piece. And I'm going to share my screen here in just a second so we can all look at it. The document itself is linked within the Google Doc that I dropped in the chat, the agenda. So you have it all in the same location. And then the second piece that we talked about is we have a lot of Boulder County staff that are very knowledgeable about all of the different programs and services and funding sources and legislation in place, legislation that's on the docket, all these different pieces of information that will help us sort out if any of our recommendations are duplicative, if they are not going to be allowable under the ARPA funding rules, or if they would, or any other reason that would prevent them from being the areas that the commissioners want to adopt. And there's 4 specific questions that the county staff will take these ideas and measure them against to give us some feedback on the areas that we should continue to build out versus the areas we might want to back off on. Again, to avoid redundancy, duplication, and any services that wouldn't be allowable under ARPA. We basically don't want to waste our time. So I'm going to start quickly first with pulling up the ARPA recommendations idea, the checklist, and I'm also going to just go ahead and drop that link in the chat. So if you're somebody who likes to just look at your screen separately, you have the ability to drive. But otherwise, can you see, do you see my calendar? Do you see the actual checklist?
I don't see anything yet. It might just be a delay on my end. I just see it says Rebecca Navinger has started to screen share, so maybe it's just taking a second.
Well, unfortunately, everything just froze on my end, which is odd. You can still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Rebecca, do you want us to share our screens? I'm happy to do it if you.
Yeah, why don't you see if you try to take over and see if it makes my Zoom come back. I'm totally frozen.
Okay. Am I sharing the checklist?
Yes, please.
Okay. It says I can't share while you're sharing, so we'll have to wait till you unfreeze, unfortunately.
Oh boy, this isn't good. I can literally do nothing.
But we can see you and you're
well, that's
okay.
great.
So in the meantime, while we wait for that, I'll just copy it and put it in the chat. It's going to be messy when you copy and put in the chat, but at least we'll be able to move forward until we.
Okay, so how about this? Can somebody on the team go ahead and spend 5 minutes going over the checklist while I, oh wait, hold on.
We see you. Yep, it's perfect.
I'm gonna reboot my Zoom. I'll be right back.
It's perfect. Don't, it works. We
Oh,
see you. It's working perfectly.
great. You're still frozen. So I'll just keep going, I guess.
Keep going. It looks great.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna do my piece and then I may have to reboot my Zoom, but we'll see. So you see the checklist. It's quite simple, but it's very powerful because it'll help us gravitate around the key questions that we really need to be asking ourselves of the proposals that we want to invest in. So at the top of it, there's a checklist that encourages us to look at whether or not these are transformational, if we're striking the right balance between transformational and getting the money out the doors so we can actually take action. Is it easy to get the money out the door? Will it be sustainable? Are we looking at it through the lenses of equity? And is this groundbreaking? I mean, this is something that the county really couldn't get going without these ARPA dollars and without this project. And then further on into the document, there are specific questions to help guide conversation. So there's a place for a summary, there's a place for goals and objectives. They ask to think about the population we want to help, how many people it'll serve, where are the areas of focus on equity and access? Is this new? Has it existed before? Are we striking that balance? You know, all of these things. And so in a perfect world, in between groups, this working group today and the next time we meet at the end of the month, the small groups that get together will use this document to do your work, okay? And then this document we can give to our county staff to, along with some, maybe some additional information to help get some responses back from them that we're on a path that is still aligning with the goals of the project, allowable under ARPA, isn't redundant, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's all I want to say about this particular document. Again, it's on the Google Share Drive, so you can get to it yourself. I'm gonna try to stop sharing my screen and see what happens. Nothing's happening. I don't know what you see. Oh, hi, I'm back. All right, let me go back to my agenda here. Before we move into discussing the results of the survey, I want to pause here and ask if anybody has any questions or concerns about the checklist or the process going forward between for what we're going to try to do today. All right. Well, let's proceed. I'm afraid to share my screen again. So perhaps one of my teammates wouldn't mind sharing the ARPA Economic Challenges Ideas ranking for working group responses. These survey results. Yes, please. So while that's coming up, hopefully you all had a chance to review them. And the takeaway is that there are 4 areas that bubbled to the surface as the most important areas of focus. So to remind you, what we did in the first group was that we took all of the ideas that had legs, you know, they had more details to them, and we rolled them up into these umbrella categories. And then we asked all of you to rank these umbrella categories based on your agreement level that these were important, and then specifically to rank them from 1 to 9, I think it was, where you thought we should be focusing our energy. And the result of that effort, based on the survey, is that 4 areas bubbled up as the most important. The first umbrella category is small business and nonprofit direct assistance. So there's lots of ideas under that. You can pull them up here in a minute. The second one is childcare. The third one is workforce development. And the fourth one is workforce recruitment and retention. So those are the 4 areas that bubbled up as the most important based on all of your responses in the survey. And so what I'd like to do is somebody share the rating of ideas Google Sheets, please. Aisha, would you mind bringing that up, or Susan?
It'll take me just a second. Let me just get, I thought someone else was doing it, so sorry for the delay on that.
Okay. And so while she's bringing this up, what I want to show you is, again, you have the link to the spreadsheet on your own, so you can pull it up. But at the bottom of this spreadsheet, it's the same spreadsheet that we've been working off of with the ideas, is that I took the all the initial ideas that were rolled up in the umbrellas, and I created 4 tabs at the bottom. The first one is small business and nonprofit assistance. The second one is childcare. The third one is workforce development. And then, of course, the fourth one is workforce recruitment and retention. And you can see at a glance that this is where all of the nitty gritty ideas are living, okay? This is really important because I don't want you to feel like anybody's ideas or the level of detail got lost in the process. We're trying to work through like a filter, right? Like, what are the bigger themes? And then the work between work group 2 and 3 will be filtering down into this level of detail. So what I'd like to do is pause here and open up the conversation, open up the floor for conversation. So based on these 4 categories, small business and nonprofit direct assistance, childcare, workforce development, workforce recruitment and retention. My first question for the group is, and maybe we can stop sharing now because if you want to see it, you can pull it up on your own screen. Are there any concerns that we have a major area missing? People are nervous that when we go forth doing our work, once we pick one of the, all 4 or 2 or 3, are there any areas people are worried about being left out? Let's start there.
Rebecca, this is Julie. I just have a question. Are you asking within those 4 areas, or are there things outside of those 4 areas you might have left out? Just to clarify that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't catch, did you share, I'm on my phone, so did you share the results of the ranking or just?
So yeah, everything's in the spreadsheets and in the word,
okay.
in the Word
I just can't
document.
see things. Okay.
Yes, and so to clarify my question is, do you feel like based on the 4 categories that raised to the surface, that those capture the most important concerns that you have, that you're hoping that this work group will work on? You know, there's all kinds of important things, but the most important things that we want to accomplish in this group based on the community that you're representing, the community that's forefront of your mind. Is there anything missing, any major groups missing? So basically, is there a category missing? Does that answer your question, Julie?
I don't know. I guess like, what if you're not asking for like, oh, I really liked a category that wasn't picked of those 4. You're asking for things that weren't even considered?
I'm asking if there's anything that is, I'm trying to think of a different way to answer your question. All of the ideas that were brought to the table to date in this process, whether it was through phase 1, the survey, community input, or the brainstorming outside the meetings or other places, all of that was rolled up into one of those 9 umbrella areas that then we surveyed, right? So of those 9, 4 bubbled up to the surface. Are you concerned that there's another major category missing that would make you worried about moving forward with the work? Am I making sense? Anybody else want to restate that?
I think what I would just, I would just maybe add, it's not restating, I think I would just add to that. I think what we'd love to do is just do a round robin and hear from everybody on, are you okay with this being the top 4? Are there things that, to Rebecca's point, are there things that we're missing that we can, and if everyone's okay with these being the top 4, we can move forward with more detailed discussion. But it would be good to just hear from everybody how the survey results landed with you. Are there things that you really feel are, you want to discuss more that didn't make it into the top 4.
Mhm. And Hayden, I see you've had your hand up, so why don't you lead us off?
Sure. One I noticed in the survey as I was scrolling through was the one that stood out to me the most was the universal basic income category, because in the actual rankings between strongly agree and there was just as many or more in strongly agree and agree in that category than some of the others actually. So in the last section, when ranked of order of importance, the ones that bubbled up to the surface weren't necessarily the same as the number of 5s and 4s. And so that I thought was really interesting. And I think it was specifically that one. I didn't do a deep dive, but I was just like looking through what got ranked where. And so I just wanted to flag that one as a potential one for us to maybe discuss, because it has 10 people who said strongly agree or agree with like this one meeting the goals. Whereas like, I think workforce development had like 9 in those categories, right? So I don't know if that's an answer to like, I don't know if I'm saying like, we should definitely do this, but I definitely wanted to flag that as a like, we should maybe bring that up to the group and look at that a little closer.
I think that's a great point, and I wonder if that is a vehicle for potentially responding to some of these areas of priority, right? So lack of childcare access, or low wages for workforce retention could be solved potentially with universal basic income. But I agree, we should flag that and keep that close to the top. I'm not sure exactly where it lives and how it lives, but thank you for highlighting that. Okay, love to hear from others, please.
Hi, everyone. I think, one of the things, and I know because they're so broad right now, and I see how on the spreadsheets, it kind of gives an idea of all the different possible ideas with it. But, I was kind of trying to figure out, again, to your point, how do these all work together or not? And really, what is the impact that we're going for with them, and what's meant through this funding? And so those were some of the things that I was thinking a little bit more about. And then how do we make sure that it's aligning to what the community said they needed, and especially through a lens of diversity?
Well stated. And if we use this checklist, that should help us get really clear on where we're coming up short or not in some of these areas.
And then I just have one last thing. And I think that 15 million is an incredible, like, what a great amount of money to work with. But I think that it's also, we have to be real about how much it costs to build programs, to sustain programs. So I get a little nervous around the transformational piece, because if we're starting something new, we just need to be thinking about the cost to be able to build a program and implement it, and then hopefully make it sustainable. So again, I don't want to be the downer on creativity and innovation. I just want us to be realistic about how far this money can go.
I am right there with you, Debbie. I mean, we run nonprofits. We know the realities of building something up from the ground and then keeping it going. It's not easy. So finding that right balance between transformation and reality is not easy, but I share that same goal with you, 100%. Other thoughts? Do we have any concerns about duplication or redundancy with either already flowing relief funds or other funds, or potentially coming funds? For example, the Circle grants that were just released last week to fund childcare and early childhood, I think, in Colorado. Is that a funding source that would make us reconsider the priority of childcare, or past funding that has come to target workforce development? is that enough of a reason to maybe change the priority order of that idea? What do we all know about current existing funding sources that makes us think, maybe I would rank this a little bit differently?
Yeah, and I hate to take, I just have one comment. I don't want to take the space here, but I also, when I was looking at this, was thinking about, yes, there is money being infused into some of these places, but this money could help build upon that. And so I think that's the other thing to think about is, where there is investment and we can build from that to make it, to even strengthen it more and have it go even further. The other thing I was looking at with the small business and nonprofit direct assistance, we do know one of the big challenges for small business and nonprofit right now is a recruitment of talent. So maybe there's some ways that these things can work together, to say is the impact that we're trying to make in supporting small business and nonprofit to be able to have a workforce, develop that they can support the salaries needed. Or I was just trying to think of how we might look at some of these pieces since all four kind of came to the top.
Yes, and I think in the checklist, it does ask if this idea leverages already completed plans, research, existing work being done, and is this a new program? So there's opportunity to expand on where that we can leverage and build upon momentum already in place.
Rebecca, I wonder if we could go around and just hear from everybody. I know that there are voices we didn't hear at the last meeting. I'm wondering if it would be okay just to hear from everybody on anything you want to share about the top 4, potentially top 5 categories. Again, if there's agreement that you feel like we can move forward with those, again, what Rebecca said, any duplication, any other pieces that you may have knowledge of that we're not aware of, or questions you have. Does that sound like an okay next step, to just go around and hear from everyone? So maybe we can start with Rachel.
Sure. So I guess just starting from the top with small business, we've been hearing from small businesses, I guess, all around that folks, they do need support with funding, like revenues, sales, and then of course, those other things like marketing or needing to pivot their business model, like during the pandemic or to online. And then just in thinking of what resources already exist and not duplicating, I think there is a lot of support for small businesses, but we could expand upon like some of the topics that I stated, especially around funding for underrepresented entrepreneurs and startups. Like those are 2 huge gaps since the pandemic where those businesses just aren't seeing funding. So I don't mean to ramble. Those are just things that I'm keeping in mind as I'm thinking about the small businesses. And then just to add on what Rebecca mentioned, the new grants coming through for childcare support, at least from a small business perspective and on the provider side, there is a huge gap for friends, family, neighbor, like in-home childcare providers. There are a lot of grant opportunity, or there are grant opportunities, I guess, maybe not a lot or many, but for the centers who are providers, but especially the friends, family, neighbors. It's like folks who are trying to start out too, it's like they're already doing childcare, but maybe they haven't actually established their business. That's who we're seeing a lot of. We're seeing a lot of those folks, and not a lot of resources specifically for those groups. So those are my comments for now, and I'm thinking about a lot of other things around this too. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Let's pass it over to Jorge.
Yeah. It's hard to, it seems like all of this is, well, it is very important. So it was very hard to know how to group them into the most important. But the first thing that comes to my mind is undocumented families that may have trouble accessing certain resources. So my question would be if they are considered for these, like for childcare, for example. In many cases, they can't access like CCAP. So yeah, how would they access that resource that those fundings are going towards?
Mm-hmm. Your point is well stated. So across all of the ideas, one we move forward with, we have to make sure it passed that test, right? That is accessible to everybody, particularly the population that you just named.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Jessica.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm generally supportive of the 4 categories broadly. I think, there's 20 of us or so here on this call. So the challenge of, consensus building amongst a large group is obviously present. So I think once we get to, these are our 4 categories in the subgroups, and I'll be interested to see how the subgroups are determined, hopefully based on, different areas of expertise to be able to help address the issues. And then also the other concern, and it's been touched on, is, well, a couple. One is $15 million is not a lot of money in this realm. So keeping that in mind. And then also there is so much overlap across these 4 categories. And so how is that being addressed? So we don't ultimately end up with, programs in 4 different categories that are siloed and don't necessarily have a positive interaction or impact on each other.
Yes, absolutely. I don't have a great answer for that yet, but hopefully we'll
I don't think anybody does.
It's like spaghettification, right? It all touches.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Julie.
Me, Julie? I don't know if there's more than one Julie. Sorry.
Julie, you got it. Well, you're up.
Okay. I thought I talked last time, so I'm good. I think, yeah, I agree with all the previous points. And I do think on the childcare, there's such a huge need on not only the provider side, but just the parent side, that it's not fully filled up with grants to centers. So I do agree with Hayden on maybe looking at the universal basic income as well. I know the city of Boulder has that in their ARPA funding. So I don't know, that's a bit more transformational and innovative than some of the like top up CCAP and these things that are already existing. So it kind of depends which criteria you're working on, but I think we have plenty to pick from. I agree that there's $15 million is really not much money. So yeah, let's see how we go.
Okay, thank you for that. Miranda. Miranda, are you there? If you are talking, you're still on mute. All right, we'll come back to you. Simon.
Thank you. I don't know that I have a lot to add to what's said. I really agree with the tone of everyone. I actually think that the 4 topics that bubbled up to the top really are strong and feel like they're in that space of not so groundbreaking that they're potentially unsustainable, but really can sort of move the needle forward on areas that we just know are really challenged. The only things I would maybe add is that spaghettification and the linkages actually could be an opportunity as we start to narrow in on what does 15 million get us down the road on. And so, Jorge talked about looking at, access and an equity lens. And I think if there's some ways to apply that across these areas, there can be some complementary investments. So for example, when we think about the challenges of a sustainable workforce, childcare is an issue for a workforce. And when we think about, how do we create more equity in opportunities for job advancement? I mean, there's maybe some lenses that we can apply that start to weave all 4 of those areas together and allow us to be more focused in our recommendations.
I love that. Excellent. Thank you. Scott.
Yes, hi. I think this is going to be a recurring thing. I would say I've agreed with just about everybody's comments to this point in terms of the 4 that came up. Just to share, when I looked at the survey results, I tried to think of a unifying, call it an executive summary or elevator pitch as to what we would ultimately, say that would summarize the group here. So I think just maybe a recommendation that, as we probably don't want to show 4 separate initiatives. We want to be able to tell a holistic story, which is that spaghetti idea. And I think that would have a lot of power in terms of, positioning how we're making our recommendations here. One concern that I do have is the long-term sustainability of some of these programs. So I think that that's something that I saw that perhaps might be a gotcha going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Scott, do you have specific things in mind which bring up the concerns about sustainability?
Well, just the general concern of maybe one-time funding that goes in with this $15 million, and in the out years, what happens to those initiatives? Do they continue, and are we absolutely saying that they can continue? Which I would also put in the category of transformational, right? So one-time funding that ultimately leverages or enhances the ability for us to continue these programs, which I think is one of the checklist items that we saw earlier. So nothing specifically, just a general watchful eye across all of the initiatives.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Miranda, are you back?
I am back. Sorry, it's a crazy day up here. Can you repeat the question though, Rebecca? I've been pulled away a few times.
Oh, sure, no problem. We are just doing a round robin to make sure that people feel comfortable and confident that we are on the right track with the 4 areas, the 4 categories that bubble to the surface as the most important coming out of the survey.
Yes, I do think that those are the best categories. I guess I would just reflect on whoever just spoke, just wanting to see if they can kind of tie together well. But I think this is the right path to go on.
Okay, thank you. Hayden?
I kind of echo a lot of the sentiment, I guess. It's definitely still want to consider universal basic income, although I know Boulder's doing some of that. I think what Simon just said was kind of like all of my notes I wrote down around like maybe like if we could look at, because none of these, some have equity built in and some don't. And like to what Debbie and Jessica and so many folks have said, like they're all intersectional, but if we could look at it from an equity lens first, they might very naturally tie into one another. So I have some nervousness about splitting. I see why splitting into groups makes sense, but it might also, like, maybe if we can start with equity as our, which is the foundation of this group, there might be more natural tie-ins that happen before we split up into these isolated categories. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Could we take a minute and talk about that a little bit? How would we back into, so we had envisioned, if you look at the agenda after we come back from a break, talk about assembling some teams to work on these groups and build them out some more. If we, before we do that and we back into it through an equity lens, what would be an alternative path? Or how could we do that better?
It's a good question. I don't want to totally side rail the agenda. I think you all are doing an amazing job. I don't know the answer right off the top of my head, but thinking about how many people have said these are so intersectional. Like if we look at, I don't know, support for the nonprofit, I have too many tabs open. Number one, small business and nonprofit assistance, and think about, you know, I think what Debbie, you were saying around like one of the biggest challenges right now is like recruitment and retention of a workforce. And we focus on marginalized communities that don't have access to employment opportunities, like that, you know, just support for nonprofits in and of itself is too broad. But when we talk about equity and like who doesn't have access to these higher paying jobs, and who do nonprofits really need to be hiring, like our participants and people who have lived experiences of our programming and how that actually supports nonprofit workers, then they very naturally tie into one another, I think. And so I think if we all broke out and did that, we might run the risk of, I don't know, separating makes sense logistically, but I think seems to be agreement that there maybe are some really natural tie-ins to one another. And I wonder if we should like accept the sticky spaghetti noodle bowl, like the situation that we're in, and somehow like try not to break it apart where it lose my analogy, but like maybe we should just like accept that in some way and see if we can, like with equity as our focus, maybe like create some groups that naturally fit together. And
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily suggesting that that's what we should do today. I think that maybe if we are breaking up, like we should have that in mind, that and somehow keep a communication, so we're not creating separate groups that seem to maybe need to work together. Someone else can say something.
Yeah,
more eloquent.
Oh, sorry, Hayden. I was just going to add that I think, you know, we absolutely want to apply our racial equity tool to any concept that we come up with. I think my question is probably about, do we have enough information to even use the tool at this point? I mean, there's some pretty specific questions that are asked with the tool that I think we would need to do a slightly deeper dive probably on some of these concepts